Great, should we go ahead and get started? My name is Elizabeth Galvin. I'm a curator at the British Museum. I'm an anthropologist. And I run the African Rock Art Image Project, which is a wholly digital project at the British Museum. It's the first time that we have acquired and accessioned into the collection objects that are born digital. And the entire collection is around rock art from throughout Africa, from Morocco down to South Africa. We're in 20 different African countries. And as a wholly digital project, this has really allowed us to have an intersection of traditional curatorial research and digital technologies that can go along with this, both in gallery spaces, but also in the way that we engage with the public and local and source communities. The first way that people can access the website, this is our project website. I encourage you to go check it out, take a postcard afterward that's got it written on there. It's a fully searchable database. It's completely online. We have rock art that ranges from 30,000 years to less than 100 years. So it is quite the range and an entire continent. So you can imagine that this, giving people the skills necessary to explore the collection, both the scholarly audience and the general public. We are a museum. We definitely fundamentally believe in our dual remit of academic research as well as public engagement. And we think that this project really sits well in the intersection between the two of them. So this is a map that we have on our website. The dark green countries are the ones that we currently have documented. The next one that's going to be going up is Nigeria, which we're really excited to have that go up in the coming weeks. Each country is given an introduction. There is a general regional background of the history of rock art in the region. And in addition to geographical spread, we also like to cover thematic spread. I think it's really important that people understand that rock art is it's our shared human history in the sense that it's one of the world's oldest arts. It's a chance that people can really understand that, yes, you can thematically pick out ideas of what was represented. It's impossible to tell the agency of why our ancestors created rock art, but there can be adjacencies that come from that and thematic ways that we can pull out, and also the way that rock art is now used for representation by local and source communities. For example, in the middle there, we have an article about geometric motifs and cattle brands, and the Maasai people of East Africa will use the rock art representations to brand their cattle now, and it's rock art representations that are thousands of years old that have now been co-opted by local communities. So it's that idea of giving people the idea of the dynamism of it, and as an entirely digital collection, we're able to put things online and give people the skills necessary to explore it. But we didn't want to just make a website. We didn't want to make just a standard project one. We really wanted to think of ways that we could creatively engage the audience, but also creatively engage people in local and source communities within the various African countries that we cover. Specifically, one of the best ways that we found to use that is social media. We've done a lot of research to figure out which social media platforms are the best to engage with people in various areas, and we try to be creative and think about the way that we can bring our research specifically into social media. So, for example, this was for World Photography Day. This is my Twitter handle. We were able to tweet that, rock art, the science of the technology that you can actually see rock art that is invisible to the naked eye. And so we were able to turn that into a GIF and just tweet that out. So it's just a small example of really trying to give people a window into the world of research that we do with a wholly digital collection. And so with this project, I thought I would just run through kind of a few case studies that have really worked for us about the way that we can engage with it. So one example is, here's some images from a rock art site in Libya. It's a 2-meter long crocodile. And with these historical photos, we were able to put them together via photogrammetry and reverse engineer some archaeological photogrammetry of this model using these historical photos, which is fantastic, especially for a collection in Libya, where fieldwork is not possible right now due to the political situation. So with this, we were able to take it and make a fairly comprehensive 3D model, and then we've put this up on Sketchfab and annotated it along with some of the work that we've done there. So you can see how it gives that idea of when you just look at a photograph, you don't necessarily understand context, and you don't necessarily understand the movement or why things are placed the way that they are. And so this was a way that we could really dynamically engage with that and have people understand and be able to play around with various models. So we have about 15 models up on Sketchfab using photogrammetry, reverse engineered photogrammetry from the collection that we've been able to pull. And then we've actually been able to make relatively scientific models, especially with ones that have photographs with scales on it. So this was a fully scientific model that we were able to make. This is a piece of rock art in South Africa. And we really wanted to think of how can we engage people with rock art digitally who might not be able to explore it otherwise. So we actually got these 3D printed, and we do handling sessions for blind and partially sighted visitors, as well as we're hoping to expand to do some sessions with visitors who may have sensory challenges. So these are 3D printed, they're 3D printed in gypsum, so it really gives it that stone-like feel. People are able to engage with a wholly digital collection, as well as, obviously the models work online, but it's a way to bring them back into the gallery space and also to engage with audiences who may not traditionally be able to engage with collections like this. So moving on, we're going to take a quick trip to Somaliland in the Horn of Africa. This is one of the areas that Jorge de Torres, who works on the project, conducts his field work. He's an archaeologist who works on the project with me. And rock art in Somaliland is fascinating. It's about 3,000 years old. So you can see here the cattle geometric, their cattle representations. That's a very common cattle representation that's found in throughout the Horn of Africa, and it's probably about 3,000 years old. And what's interesting is you have these representations, but it's not very necessarily well documented, and it's not necessarily able to have people engage with it. And so this is Jorge, who works in the field. As you can see, a lot of them are on outcrops or overhangs. And we really wanted people to understand the concept of this, of how do you understand rock art from this digital context of what's above you, what's around you, and actually keep it in the landscape. But in addition to this, it's how can we also work with local and source communities with our research to make sure that it goes out there and that we're ensuring a knowledge transfer and a knowledge sharing, because obviously local communities have a lot to say about this, and I think it's a really key way to have this dialogue around this. So for example, here's that's the Lascaux site. If you look very, very tiny up there, that's the Lascaux Rock Art Site Museum. That's Lascaux, which means the camel's well, which was the site that Jorge was just on. Right when Jorge's there, he regularly gives talks, and it's an important, what is actually really fantastic is that there's really, really good internet connection there. Sometimes I'm actually able to call Jorge via WhatsApp better than when he's in Somaliland than when he's actually in East London, so it's fantastic. So we've really tried to take advantage of that, of the internet connections and work with that. So we've made in another 3D model in photogrammetry, with plotting together, and it's actually a very limited number of photos. We're not doing massive amounts. These aren't massive, hundreds, even to thousands of images that usually go into photogrammetry. We're actually using a lot of historical collections, which is really great to show the potential of what actually can be made using historical photographs of sites that have since been destroyed. So we're lucky that Lascaux has not been destroyed, but rock art is incredibly susceptible to damage by both natural and man-made events. So we've put our rock art site up on this one up in Sketchfab. That's fully searchable. You can play around with it. But we wanted to bring this back into our community work, and we didn't want it necessarily just to be us in London and then traveling to Somaliland and that's it. We really wanted to figure out ways that we can engage people with it. And specifically around this collection, London has a huge Somali population. It's one of the biggest. It's the biggest Somali population in Europe. It's one of the biggest diaspora communities in the world of Somali people, and there's a long history of trade and movement of peoples between of Somali peoples between Britain and Somalia and Somaliland. And so we really wanted to tap into this and really engage with our existing community partners. We have a project at the museum that's called Object Journeys, where we work with people who are members of local communities to make sure they come into the museum and engage with the collection. And one example is that a pilot project was run with Object Journeys. One of the groups that did it was the Somali community. Another one was a community of people from Giraffes in the Pacific, and also a South Asian community also came in to work with the collection. So we really wanted to tap into Object Journeys, especially with the Somali community and our photogrammetry with archaeology. So one of the things that we created was this. I've got it here. This is a 3D print of our model that we've had printed out, because what we're doing now is we're going into schools in London, Somali supplementary schools, and playing around with rock art and teaching archaeology and teaching the importance of heritage and heritage management and how we can engage with that. And so it's taking the digital sphere, the things that only exist online, and bringing them back into the classroom and bringing them back in ways that we can engage with that. So that's Jorge there, who's playing a great match game with the kiddos, who were very engaged and very, very into it. And which was fantastic is that a lot of their parents were there, and many, these were people who were born and raised in Somaliland, and a lot of them said they had no idea about this archaeological heritage. It's not necessarily taught in the classrooms, and so it was really with a way that they are able to engage with their own heritage and work with that. And so we did a range of levels for educational ones. So we've got the little kids were able to explain what rock art was, how the decoration of the cattle that's on there, it has been suggested that might possibly represent a textile that shows that the cattle is important to one person or belongs to one person. So we had we photoshopped it out, and the kids were able to color in the cattle to show what represented them and what made things important to them. And so that really allowed them the chance to get the concept of why we create art and why is it important and what art and how one can engage with heritage. And then for some of the older kids, what we did is we used various 3D prints that we had actually previously used in a lot of our access events, and we were teaching archaeological tracing. We were teaching how does one engage, how do you do archaeological sketches? And because they're 3D prints, you're able to do a lot more tracing and various other ones where you're not necessarily as concerned with conservation issues that would happen if you had the actual site, because all the rock art remains in situ in the various African countries. And so this was a really fantastic way for us to engage with local Somali teens who were interested in archaeology and maybe had never really understood what archaeology was, and it was a chance for them to learn tracing, to learn how we work with the collections and various ones. But then again, it's also not just children that we want to work with. We want to look with local groups. And so we use 3D prints, as you can see here. We use 3D prints to engage with a local Somali women's group. And so we're working with rock art and 3D prints as a way to go into these community groups where people are able to share and engage with it. And one of the fantastic outcomes that we've had from this is, because we're very involved in social media, this is Abir Hussein, who is a Somali-British young woman who has become very interested in photogrammetry with our project. And so we're getting a lot of tweets and questions about how do you do this? How do you build something like this? You know, she wants to apply for a grant to go and build something with the rock art there, which is just fantastic. And that's exactly what we're hoping to do. Is we're very open with our data and our methodologies, and we're really keen for people from local and source communities to actually get involved and engaged with this. So moving on from Somaliland, we're going to take a trip down to South Africa, which has one of the richest rock art sites in the world. It is absolutely stunning, and it's some of the oldest rock art, and it was one of the longest practicing rock art cultures in the world. It practiced rock art from about 30,000 years ago up to about less than 100 years ago. About 3 generations ago was the last rock art that was practiced in South Africa. And so what we want to do is take a way that we can plot. I mean, for example, this is our data plotting of our archaeological research of what we have from the data. And we thought, how rock art cannot be removed from its landscape. It is inextricably linked with this. You need to make sure people understand the context of that, and how can we bring people to understand rock art, not just through a photo, but understanding what is involved around it. So what we did is we built through Unity, an open source and gaming software, a chance for people to explore it in virtual reality. We purposefully chose to make this an app that's downloadable for free on mobile phones using cardboard technologies, because we didn't want access to technology to be a barrier in being able to use this. And what has been fantastic, I mean, this all has voiceover to it and sound. But what is a chance to give people the idea of the humbling nature of the landscape that a lot of these rock art sites are put into, but also about how these were very special places to these people. They were not places that they lived. This was not decoration of the house where you lived. This was a special sacred place that people would go to practice rock art. So we really wanted to make sure people understood that and the context of South Africa. But this presented also unique challenges. So this is actually obviously just a screen grab. Forgive my shaky hands. But I encourage you to download the app. And I've actually got it here on my phone and a cardboard if you want to come play with it afterwards. It also presents a unique challenge because, as I said before, rock art is extremely susceptible to damage by man-made events. And we didn't want to make something that you want to be able to explain rock art and landscape, but you don't want to make, because you're making things so available, you don't want to create a shopping list where people can go off and chip things off. The reason we specifically chose Game Pass Shelter is because it's probably the most protected rock art site on the entire continent. It's in a national park. It has a 24-hour visitor security, and it has a visitor center, so it's regularly checked. So this was specifically chosen for that. And so with each of those, you're able to click on the panel. You're able to have various parts highlighted there. And so one of the things that we've been talking about is the importance of the eland, which to the San Bushman people who created this rock art is God's favorite animal. It's overwhelmingly the most represented piece of rock art that is made by this culture. So it's a way for people to engage and explore with it. And we brought it back into the museum. And we had a day of where people could come and play around. That's in the Great Court at the British Museum in London, and get some feedback of how we engage with this and how we work with this. And then since then, we've been able to send it to our community partners who are hoping to use this as a way for access, because obviously, as you saw, Game Pass Shelter, you can visit it, but it's up at the top of a very steep cliff with a escarpment. So for people who have access issues, this might be a really good way for them to explore the site on the site. So it's a way to really keep the dialogue going, to make sure that we're here listening to our community partners and our local researchers to go back and forth here. So we thought of, this was a South Africa project, but we thought of how can we bring our research and research of various other scholars who work with rock art back into the sphere. Because we are a research institution, but we're also a public institution. So these are some fantastic GIS maps out of King's College London, out of the Green Sahara Project, which is a fantastic project run by Professor Nick Drake and Paul Breeze. Now, this is not very accessible. As much as I love this and would love to talk to you guys about, early Holocene paleohydrology, that's, say that 3 times fast. That's not something that people really necessarily understand. But what you can explain is that, and this is Nick and Paul's research, that about 11,700 years ago, the Sahara was green. It was a period of natural climate change where there were megalakes and waterways that were throughout the Sahara. And taking our rock art research, we're able to plot representations of various animals and compare that with a fossil record. So this is what Nick has done here. This is with a crocodile, so you can see representations here. But again, this is not necessarily accessible of what's going on. If anybody wants to nerd out later about GIS maps, I am definitely your person to talk to about this. But this is not necessarily engaging in how we can get people to understand that. I mean, similarly here we go, this is representations of giraffes. Because when the audience thinks of the Sahara, they think of this. They think it's dry. And this is a time period that is hard to explain with it. But then you start to see rock art like this, which is on the left, this is a 5-meter tall giraffe in Niger. You have, again, the 2-meter long crocodile in the middle of Libya. You have elephants that are in Algeria that are from this time period. And so what we wanted to do was, so we're building right now, this is still very much in beta, but we're building one of those interactive experiences where people can essentially go back in time and explore rock art and understand the concept of when the Sahara was green. And so, oops. This is just a very early introduction of what we're hoping to build out of this with making it accessible. So again, there will be voiceover here where people to understand that the desert, it wasn't always there, that it was green, that a lot of the rock art that represents fishing, that represents cattle herding, that that comes later, but then also, various large-scale fauna that life could not, in the Sahara could not support it. And so by taking those GIS maps, but then just making it more interactive, showing, that water used to exist here, you can imagine that it's getting green. So it's a little bit more approachable about the way that people want to access it, and people can engage with archaeological research from King's College London. Great. Well, and I'm also just want to say thank you for letting me talk today. I'm happy to answer any questions, but also I'd be really keen to hear what's going on in your institutions and how you're working with your curators to make on science literacy, but also on making academic research accessible using technology. So thank you. Oh, yeah, sorry. I'm the curator of the project.
Okay. And I'm just curious how you are involved in, because a lot of this is involving outreach and education. How much of that is falling to you versus like a broader team that you work with?
So I think it's very much a team effort. It's something that we have a lot of the collections, but we have a really fantastic schools program. So for our work in London, for example, with our Somali community, we're working with our schools and education team who are helping us develop the curriculum around that. But it's very much a collaborative effort in making sure that we're just talking and building on existing work. So for example, when we knew the Object Journeys project was going on, we were just saying, oh, you know what, we could build on this and we could make something that's specifically just around rock art. And then we were able to use our existing contacts and go into the various schools from there. It's definitely very collaborative. It's working with our digital team who have been incredibly enthusiastic on helping with this. And what I actually think is key to this is that we've been working together for so many years that when it came time, we have had exhibitions about this. When it came time to get things in exhibition spaces, the teams had been working together for so long that it was very organic in the way that we could approach getting these into gallery spaces. It wasn't just, now we can actually start engaging with it. It's because we've been talking about our research continuously. It was able to have this very organic way out of that. Yes?
So I'm curious about what the entire collection consists of. Is it like digital images, 3D images, video,
So the
oral interviews?
the registered collection is,
Yeah, what's the entirety?
yeah, the registered collection, so registered as objects are digital photographs. Everything else that we're creating along that is going to be archival and supplementary material.
And so are some of those historical from?
Yeah, so they're probably from, we work with a partner called the Trust for African Rock Art, which is based out of Nairobi, that works with us to get a lot of the historical photos.
And I'm sorry, what was the earliest photos?
The earliest photo we have in our collection is, I would say, late 1970s. But there's plenty of organizations out there, such as the Frobenius Institute, that has plenty of early rock art photos from the 1930s. And the Rock Art Research Institute at Wits University also has a lot of early photographs. And I think what's great about these photographic collections is a lot of them are very open about sharing data and seeing where we can do comparative studies. For example, in Libya, there's one rock art site that has had some natural subsidence, but they have it intact, and we have a photo of when the natural subsidence has happened, and then we also have a photograph of it now, which unfortunately was graffitied. So you're able to plot against it because it has been digitized in that way.
Are there local stories about the origins and, is it capturing?
Absolutely.
Those kind of things through interviews, oral
So,
video interviews?
yeah, so what we're doing, we try to, the thing is that a lot of, it's impossible to tell the agency, and a lot of times local, and it's not necessarily invalidating what their belief system was, but a lot of time there is, because we're talking about art that might be 12,000 years old from nomadic peoples, there might be a gap of, it's not necessarily a direct story that's told, but there is local myths, and then we do bring that in, and we do, we try and incorporate that in the the way that we engage with it. For example, there's one site in Algeria called the Crying Cows. I have a postcard of it if you want to come see it, which is about 7,000 to 8,000 years ago. We're going to be bringing this up in our Green Sahara project. It's these beautiful cattle that are in bas relief, and when the shadow casts it at night, the shadows on it look like the cows are bending down to drink water, but they all have tears in their eyes. And the local myth is that it was carved when a cattle herd was looking for water, but it all had dried up. And he carved it as he watched his cattle die one by one because they didn't have any water. Now, mapping that against Nick and Paul's research out of King's College London, that area actually pools water in the base of where these were carved, and 7,000 to 8,000 years ago actually correlates to, when this rock art was made, actually correlates to a dry period in the Sahara in between the green. So it's interesting to say that that these local myths really give a vibrancy to it, and that definitely works in the Sahara. But in southern Africa, there's specifically the rock art of the Sambushmen people. That is a much more direct link of the culture that made it, because some of the rock art, as I said, it's probably the longest practicing rock art group that stopped practicing due to colonization and apartheid policies. With it, though, it is interesting that we have been trying to work with various local contemporary artists who are Sambushmen. So we had an exhibition on rock art of Southern Africa. We included some contemporary art from Sambushman artists who are inspired by the historical rock art to show that this is a living, breathing expression, and that rock art that was practiced 100 years ago has nothing to, I mean, there might be some things that are similar, but they have as much to do with the rock art that was thousands of years before that as the previous one. So there is interesting that people find identity in it, and we definitely try to record that wherever possible, and especially engage with that. Okay, yeah?
Can you talk a little bit about your experience when you take like a VR component? How do you integrate that into the space? Are you putting that in galleries, or are you separating it?
So we don't, we're not doing it in a gallery. What we did is we had that in an event with, we had an exhibition on called South Africa Art of a Nation that included rock art, and then we also had a special gallery space that was just on rock art in and of itself. And then at the same time, as part of this event, we had that in the Great Court at the museum, where people were able to engage and come with VR. But it's much more not necessarily tied into specifically in the gallery space. We're trying to get that out, that people can download the app and use it at home. We don't want people, we don't want to create a digital divide or a divide where people have to buy Oculus Rift headsets in order to engage with that, because that immediately limits who's able to engage with it. We really want people at home to be able to work with it, to download the app, to play with it, and then maybe use social media to give us some feedback. Okay, yeah?
Did you use an iterative process, or did this project evolve?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So we started the project in 2013. And some of the technologies that we've been able to use now just did not exist when we started the project. And that definitely required a degree of flexibility of the way that we approach this. And also being really honest with failures, and being really honest and putting our hands up and say, this did not work, but what we're gonna do next is try and shift it and do that. And I think that's key to any digital project, is being really open with both successes and failures. We do, but it's also, we have such a wide audience that we definitely try to work with our community partners to do user testing of the various apps, but then we also do just work with our UX team at the museum to really help us engage that. Okay, yeah?
So for the VR experts, are you intending to use those assets you're creating for a more immersive experience in the future? Is the technology like the Oculus right now is a little less out of reach, but as that becomes more like the Oculus Go for 200, as those become more accessible, do you plan to use that in more advanced experiences, or just kind of stick with cardboard for the long term?
We, as a policy, try to use no-cost solutions, and if anything, low-cost solutions, because we want this to be replicated by the universities and partners that we work with. And so, as a policy, we try to use the absolute cheapest thing as possible, because we figure if we can do a lot of the legwork, because we do have we have a generous grant to pay for it, that if we can do the experimentation, that means it's much more replicable with our community partners. So it's not necessarily that we're anti the higher technologies. It's more of, we're really about making sure that things are accessible in low bandwidth speeds, that things are accessible by the local technologies that are being used by our community partners. Great, well, thank you so much. I just want to say I really appreciate that, and please come up and grab a postcard and touch the rock art. 3D print.